The alert came in at 0340 station time, which meant Orath was already at his desk. He slept badly on Verath Station, had slept badly for most of his 19 years here, which he had eventually accepted as a fixed condition of his relationship with this particular gravitational intersection, the way some people accepted a bad knee or a persistent intolerance for certain foods. The station hummed at a frequency that didn't bother most species and that his chest resonance plate picked up like a second heartbeat. He had learned to work in it. At 0340, he was reviewing procurement allocations for Wing 2's next survey cycle, his lower arms making the small constant adjustments of someone comfortable at a familiar desk. When the biosafety alert lit his terminal in the specific red, that meant he was no longer reviewing procurement allocations. He ran the response from memory. 22 years of Galactic Research Administration had converted the Galactic Quarantine Protocol from a document into a reflex. Novel pathogen, multi-species susceptibility, rapid onset, biosafety level 4. He sealed the affected wings before he fully processed that he was sealing them. His upper arms moved across the override panel with the unhesitating efficiency of muscle memory. His lower arms went to the communication array and had Director Kale's secure channel open in 12 seconds. 17 personnel in the sealed section. 11 confirmed exposed, 6 in adjacent areas that shared the environmental circulation. He sealed a perimeter that included all 17 to be certain he made the correct call. The math was not ambiguous. 17 inside, 26 outside, a novel pathogen with no catalog match and a transmission vector that was still unestablished. He sealed the wing and filed the initial report and pulled up the internal camera feeds from the affected sections and sat down at the monitoring station to begin the documentation the directorate would require for post-incident review. He did not hesitate. Hesitation was not part of the correct response. He noted for the record that 11 of the 17 personnel in the sealed wing were human. He noted this because it was a fact, and facts belonged in reports. He did not note any additional significance because there was no additional significance. The Non-Interference Accord listed humans as a Class 3 developing civilization with provisional galactic standing, which meant they were subject to all standard biosafety protocols, which he had just applied. He watched the camera feeds. He waited for the predicted arc, initial alarm, communication attempts, deterioration. Deputy Commander Shen confirmed the seal from the Central Operations Hub and filed her own concurrent report, which Orath reviewed and found entirely correct. On Camera 3, in the East Wing Common Room, the humans were arguing. He watched them argue for 38 minutes. He was not a xenobehavioral specialist, but he had administered a multi-species station for 19 years, and he could read the broad registers of most species he worked alongside. The body language of alarm, the body language of grief, the body language of people processing a situation they had not planned for. He watched them. The argument was energetic and involved overlapping speech patterns and at least 2 people talking simultaneously, which was characteristic of human group stress response. He observed, noted it in the camera log, and waited. At minute 41, they stopped arguing. His lower arms went still. He was not immediately aware of this. He became aware of it approximately 90 seconds later when he reached for his notation stylus and found his fine manipulation fingers unresponsive to the instruction, frozen in midair, and traced this back to the moment on the feed when the human stopped arguing and began moving. The movement was the wrong kind of movement. He had anticipated, the protocol anticipated, a certain kind of post-alarm human behavior, attempts to communicate through the seal, physical testing of the barrier, potentially some degree of what xenobehavioral literature described as withdrawal clustering, the instinctive grouping of social species under threat. These were the behaviors of people processing an impossible situation. What he was watching was not that. What he was watching was the movement of people who had divided a problem into parts and were working the parts. There was communication, but it was brief and directional. There was motion, but it was purposeful. People going to specific places in the wing for specific reasons and returning with specific things. Within 2 hours, they had stripped their filtration mask from layered clothing and air scrubber components, working in pairs, the construction distributed and efficient. Within 6 hours, they had reorganized the common room into a triage layout that any medical professional would recognize. He composed a monitoring report, In the anomalous behavior field, he wrote 3 sentences and deleted them, and wrote 2 sentences and deleted one and submitted the remaining sentence, which read, "Affected personnel demonstrating organized response behavior." He stared at this sentence. It was accurate. It was also the single most inadequate sentence he had submitted in 22 years of report writing. He opened the camera feed for the East Wing Common Room and watched Dr. Priya Vasquez disassemble the geological spectrometer onto the floor in front of her. He knew that spectrometer. He had signed its procurement order. He opened its technical specification file in a secondary window and read it while watching her work. She found something in the specifications on the second page that he had read 4 years ago and not retained because it was not relevant to geological survey applications. She was making it relevant. She reconfigured a component housing, and then a second one, and then jury-rigged what appeared to be a filtration bypass using materials from 2 separate equipment kits. And Orath sat at his monitoring station with his lower arms completely still and watched her do something he would not have thought to do with a geological spectrometer on the best day of his professional life. He filed a second report. In the anomalous behavior field, he wrote, "Human personnel are attempting unconventional equipment modification for apparent xenobiological application. Outcome not anticipated to be viable." He submitted it and kept watching. On day 3, the walls were covered. He had watched it develop, had watched it begin as a few notation lines on the common room surface on the afternoon of day 2. Vasquez and a second scientist, Dr. Bout, Yennefer, writing quickly and then stepping back and writing more. By day 3, it had expanded to 2 full walls, dense and cross-referenced and structured in the specific way that Orath, who had spent his career in research administration, recognized without being able to fully read the diagram of a working mind in crisis, which is also the diagram of a working mind functioning at its limit, which is also, occasionally, the diagram of a working mind doing something remarkable. He requested camera enhancement. He got enough resolution to read fragments. What he read was not what he had expected to read. He recognized that he had expected, the desperate improvisation of people working from fear, the frantic notation of people trying anything because anything was better than nothing. What the enhanced feed showed him was structured hypothesis and error correction and, in several places, visible argument. 2 handwriting styles in dialogue, notation and counter-rotation. A scientific disagreement conducted on a wall at speed. He identified 3 places where a line of reasoning had been crossed out, reconsidered, and reapproached from a different angle. He identified what appeared to be a systematic cross-referencing system between the 2 walls. He sat with this for 11 minutes without moving. Then he became aware that his neck and upper arm patterning had deepened to near black, and he adjusted his collar, and he composed a report and did not file it. He watched Vasquez and Farr argue. He could not hear them through the closed environmental system, but he did not need to. The argument was entirely visible, 2 people standing at the wall in their improvised filtration masks, pointing at sections of notation, occasionally writing over each other's work, occasionally standing back and crossing their arms in the specific human posture he had been told looked like defiance and had learned over years to read as something closer to intense consideration. He watched them argue, and he watched the notation evolve, and he watched 3 of the other humans, symptomatic, visibly unwell, running what his environmental biosensors flagged as elevated temperature equivalents, bring Vasquez and Farr water and then return to their assigned tasks. He sat with his upper arms crossed over his chest and watched 2 people who were also dying work on the problem of their dying with the focused intensity of people who had temporarily forgotten that fact. He filed the report at 2200 and left the anomalous behavior field blank for the first time in 3 days because he did not have a sentence for it. Day 4 at 1423, Marcus Webb walked up to camera 7 in the East Corridor. He was 26 years old, visibly running a fever, and still wearing his improvised filtration mask. He looked directly into the camera. He held up his right hand, thumb extended upward. Orath knew the gesture. He had catalogued human nonverbal communication as a standard component of multi-species administrative training. It was in the onboarding packet, cross-referenced with the xenobehavioral database. 3 pages of gestures and their approximate meanings. He knew what a thumbs up meant. He had known for 19 years what a thumbs up meant. He stared at the feed. His resonance plate constricted. He felt it. The slow tightening of the breathing aperture, the slight change in his own sound, the harmonic undertone that other Sekal would have read immediately and that humans consistently described as resonant and pleasant, which was information he had received twice in his career and both times filed under things he did not examine closely. He breathed through it. His pupils had contracted sharply toward vertical and were not fully relaxing. He breathed through that too. Marcus Webb, who had a fever, who had been sealed inside a quarantine zone with a novel pathogen for 4 days, who was dying on the correct schedule according to the Galactic Quarantine Protocol, was standing at camera 7 trying to tell the person who had sealed him and that he was okay. Orath sat with this for a long time. He thought about what it meant that Marcus had walked to that camera with that specific purpose, had thought about the person on the other side of the seal, and decided that the person on the other side should know something, and had chosen the most direct available communication. A single gesture, cross-species legible, unmistakable. He thought about what kind of mind does that. He thought about what it costs, and whether Marcus knew what it cost, and whether it mattered to Marcus that Orath was Sekal and would be reading the gesture through a translation layer. He concluded that Marcus had considered this and had decided it didn't matter, and that this conclusion was itself a kind of information. He did not file a report for 2 hours. When he did, he wrote, human personnel continue to demonstrate atypical response patterns, morale indicators inconsistent with projected model. He reread this. He changed morale indicators to behavioral patterns. He submitted the report. He brought up camera 7 and looked at the empty corridor for a while. Because Marcus had gone back to work and Orath was still at his desk trying to locate the professional framework in which a thumbs up was a data point he could process correctly. He was not finding it. On day 5, Tariq Hassan moved from the research area to the triage section in the common room and did not come back. Orath had been tracking his biosensor readings. He had been tracking all 17 sets of readings, but he had been tracking Hassan's with the specific attention of someone who knows which variable is load-bearing. Hassan was 44, a geologist, 15 years in deep space postings, the most severely symptomatic of the 17, and he had been deteriorating on a curve that Orath's biosafety training told him was the steepest in the room, the one that reached its conclusion first. He watched the others help Hassan to the triage area. He watched the specific quality of care with which they moved him, efficient, unhurried, the practiced movement of people who had agreed on this beforehand and were executing it without discussion. He watched Vasquez make a decision with her face, a small internal recalculation visible in the set of her jaw and the brief stillness of her eyes, and then put it away and turn back to the wall. He watched Farr continue writing without looking up, and he understood that not looking up was its own kind of decision. At 0340, 19 hours into his shift, he watched Marcus Webb sit down beside Tariq Hassan in the early station morning when the rest of the wing had gone to rest rotation. Marcus didn't bring anything. He didn't do anything. He sat beside the motionless geologist in the quiet of the sealed wing and stayed there for 20 minutes. And Orath watched every minute of it from the monitoring station, his lower arms completely still, his collar pulled high over the dark patterning at his neck. He had not gone to rest rotation. He was aware that he had not gone to rest rotation. He was aware that this was not regulation. He did not go. He thought about the protocol. It was not a complicated document. It had been written by people who understood mathematics and galactic biosafety and the history of pathogenic outbreaks across 11 documented cases, and it had been written correctly, and he had executed it correctly, and Tariq Hassan was lying motionless in a makeshift triage area, while Marcus Webb sat beside him doing nothing useful at all. He thought about whether nothing useful at all was accurate. He thought about it for a long time. He did not file a report. He watched Marcus Webb sit with someone who was dying, doing nothing useful, in the specific way of people who have decided that presence is the thing they have to offer. His upper arms crossed over his chest. He sat in the position he had been told looked like defiance and stayed there. Day 6, 11-7. Dr. Vasquez at camera 7. She was still wearing her filtration mask. She had not slept, by Orath's estimate, in 31 hours. He had been watching the camera feeds with enough continuity that he had a reliable read on everyone's rest cycles, and Vasquez's was the most erratic, the one that kept cutting short at 2 or 3 hours and resuming work. She was holding a handwritten sign. She held it up to the camera and waited. W.E. Have some meething? Need come supplies from Wing 3 storage. List follows. The list followed on a second sign written in smaller text, covering the full page. She held each section up in sequence, patient and steady, waiting for him to read before advancing to the next section. He read the list 3 times. Some of the compounds were standard research chemicals, easily accessible from Wing 3 storage, the kind of materials any station of Verath's classification kept on hand. Some of them were not standard research chemicals for any application he recognized. He cross-referenced 4 items against the station's chemistry database and found 2 with no listed application in the current research inventory. He opened the Galactic Quarantine Protocol and read Section 4, Clause 2, No materials, equipment, or consumables shall be transferred across an established quarantine seal for the duration of the containment period. He read it twice. The language was unambiguous. He opened a new report and wrote the first sentence of a justification for non-transfer. He stopped. He looked at the camera, where Dr. Vasquez was still waiting with her sign, patient and exhausted, not leaving. He looked at Tariq Hassan's biosensor readings, deteriorating, the curves steepening, the numbers doing what numbers did when they were counting towards something Orath did not want them to reach. His neck patterning had gone almost black. He could feel it, not the darkening itself, but the pressure behind it, the thing his body was doing involuntarily in response to the thing his mind was trying not to decide. His resonance plate was almost fully constricted. He sat with the blank justification report. He sat with Section 4, Clause 2. He sat with Tariq Hassan's biosensor readings. He looked at Vasquez at the camera. She had not moved. She was standing there with a handwritten list of chemical compounds and the specific posture of someone who has done everything within her available capacity and has come to the limit of what she can do without help and is waiting to find out whether help is available. He closed the justification report without submitting it. He opened the emergency supply port override. He cross-referenced Station Operational Code Section 7, Clause 4, Commander's Emergency Discretionary Authority, invocable in circumstances not fully anticipated by standard protocol. He thought about whether this was a circumstance not fully anticipated by standard protocol. He thought about this for approximately 30 seconds, which was the shortest amount of time he had ever spent on a decision that was going to require significant reporting. He transferred the materials. He opened a new report and wrote, Materials transfer executed under Commander's Emergency Discretionary Authority per Station Operational Code, Section 7, Clause 4. He submitted it before he could think about it further. Then he sat down and discovered that the SECL language, which had served him across 22 years of research administration and 114 incident reports, did not have a word for what he was currently experiencing. He checked because he was thorough. It didn't. Vasquez at the camera had seen the supply port indicator light change. She lowered the sign. She stood for a moment looking at the port. Then she looked back at the camera, directly at it, directly at him, and nodded once. Not performance, not ceremony, the specific nod of someone who has just received something they needed and is acknowledging it without overstating it, because the work is not done and the time for overstating things comes later. She went back to work. Orath sat at his monitoring station and breathed carefully and did not go to rest rotation. Day 7, 08:30. He watched through camera 3 with the complete unbroken attention of someone who has staked his professional judgment on a hypothesis and is about to find out if the hypothesis holds. Vasquez's team had been preparing the treatment since before station dawn. The synthesis notes, which she had been transmitting through the wing's internal data system, had been arriving in his terminal since day 6 and which he had been receiving and not opening, because opening them felt like admitting something he was not ready to admit. He watched them administer the treatment to Tariq Hassan. Hassan was motionless in the triage area. The administration was careful, methodical. The specific, careful methodicalness of people who have checked their work 3 times and are aware that the margin for error is 0. Vasquez oversaw it and far ran the monitoring, and 2 of the other humans stood at the edge of the triage area in the way of people who want to help and know they cannot help and are present anyway. Then they waited. Orath waited with them. He watched the research team watch the data, the environmental biosensor outputs visible on a screen they had rigged from a survey terminal, reading Hassan's vital indicators in the clinical language of numbers that either moved in the right direction or didn't. He watched their faces. He watched the specific quality of stillness that settled over the common room. The held-breath stillness of people who have done everything they can do and have arrived at the boundary of what effort can accomplish, and are standing at that boundary waiting to see what the universe decides. He knew this quality of stillness. He had felt it himself. At points in his career he did not often revisit, the specific combination of exhaustion and hope that is also, if you look at it directly, the most exposed a person can be. 7 hours later, the biosensors registered stabilization. Orath read the reading. He read it again. He read it 2 more times because he was thorough, and because reading it 4 times was how he processed the distance between what the protocol said would happen and what the sensors were telling him had happened. He was not a xenobiologist. He was not a medical professional. He was a research station commander with 22 years of administrative experience and a very precise understanding of what novel pathogens with rapid transmission markers did to exposed personnel, and this was not it. He went to his quarters for the first time in 31 hours. He lay in the bunk and looked at the station's ceiling and listened to the frequency that had kept him up for 19 years and did not sleep for another 2 hours. When he slept for 6 hours and woke up and went directly back to the monitoring station, and the readings were still stable and all 17 humans were still alive. Day 8 was the longest breath he had ever held. He watched the wing with the specific quality of attention of someone who no longer expected the worst, but had not yet given himself permission to stop expecting it. He watched Tariq Hassan sitting up in the triage area arguing with Vasquez about whether he was well enough to return to work. He could not hear the argument. He did not need to. The body language was entirely legible across the species barrier, Hassan gesturing toward the notation wall, Vasquez shaking her head in the specific way of someone who has not slept properly in 5 days and is not in the mood, Hassan gesturing more emphatically, Vasquez pointing at the triage mat with a definitiveness that required no translation. Hassan sat back down. Orath was aware that he was relieved Vasquez won. He opened Dr. Vasquez's synthesis notes. He read for 4 hours. He was not a xenobiologist. Some sections required him to cross-reference against the station's scientific database to follow the methodology, what he could follow, the structural logic of the approach, the specific and documented process by which a xenobiologist with a modified geological spectrometer and an improvised chemistry setup had characterized a novel pathogen using equipment designed for entirely different purposes, was among the most rigorous scientific documentation he had reviewed in his career. He found the 2 errors Vasquez had noted in her own methodology, with their corrections. He found the place in the notation where Farr's approach had diverged from Vasquez's and the argument they had conducted in the margins and the resolution they had reached, which turned out to be a synthesis of both approaches. He found Marcus Webb's name in the acknowledgement section, a junior survey technician listed as data verification and moral infrastructure, the second of which was not a standard research acknowledgement category and which Orath read 3 times before he understood what it meant and why it was there. He opened his personal log. He marked the entry private. He wrote, "They did not do the impossible. They did something we had no category for. These are not the same thing." He closed the log. His lower arms were moving. His patterning had returned almost to baseline. He sent a message to Deputy Commander Shen confirming that the biosensor readings remained stable and that decontamination protocol initiation was under consideration for the following day. Shen responded within 4 minutes. Her response was entirely correct and professional and contained, in its final line, a single sentence that was neither, "I have been watching the camera feeds." He read this sentence. He understood it completely. He did not respond to it because there was nothing to say that the camera feeds had not already said. Day 9. 09:15. Marcus Webb at camera 7. He was standing straight, no fever lean, the filtration mask pushed down around his neck where it no longer needed to be. He was holding a sign. He held it up. Tirapennment, Villable, Foal Synthis Nose Prepared, Request Decontamination Protocol for Reentry. Also, Tariq says, Itchy. Below this, in smaller letters, WE's we're ready to come out now. Please let US out. Orath looked at the sign. He looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled up 17 biosensor readings. Stable, improving, the numbers moving in the direction numbers were supposed to move, and the synthesis notes he had read twice, and the decontamination protocol he had been keeping open in a side window for 12 hours. He initiated the decontamination sequence. He watched the status indicators begin their cycle and felt his resonance plate do something he had no clean word for. He contacted Director Kale on the secure channel and delivered his status report in the precise clinical language of a professional who had been trained for exactly this kind of communication. He delivered every fact in order. He reported the treatment development, the materials transfer and its authorization, the biosensor stabilization, the synthesis documentation, the current status of all 17 personnel. He was thorough and accurate and correct. In the anomalous findings section, he typed the sentence that had been assembling itself across 9 days of monitoring reports and camera feeds and biosensor readings. The quarantine did not protect the station from the pathogen. The quarantine, it appears, protected the pathogen from the station. Director Kale was quiet for 4 seconds, which was the longest he had been quiet in 9 days of secure channel communication. Then he said he would need the full synthesis documentation and a complete incident report, and that a directorate review team would be dispatched within the standard 14-day window. Orath confirmed. Kale asked if all personnel were accounted for. Orath said, all 17. Kale said, confirmed. The channel closed. The decontamination airlock cycled. The door opened. They came through in the order they had apparently agreed on. The least symptomatic first, then the recovering, then Priya Vasquez carrying her data tablet with the full synthesis notes, and then Tariq Hassan, walking under his own power slowly, with a slight lean to the left that the person behind him was monitoring with the careful peripheral attention of someone who has been paying close attention to that lean for 3 days and is not going to stop now. And then Marcus Webb last through the door, coming through the decon airlock into the station corridor where Orath was standing, because he had walked down here from the monitoring station without quite deciding to and was here now. Marcus came through the door and saw him and gave a thumbs up. Orath nodded. It felt insufficient. He was aware that it felt insufficient. He did not know what would be sufficient, what the correct response was. From a Sekal station commander to a 26-year-old junior survey technician who had spent 9 days being sealed inside an impossible situation and had spent those 9 days thinking about the person on the other side of the seal. He did not have the framework. He had spent 22 years building a professional framework, and it did not cover this. He nodded again. The humans apparently found this sufficient. Something in the room relaxed. He felt it more than saw it through his resonance channels. A change in the quality of the air, the collective exhale of 17 people who had been holding something for 9 days and were now incrementally setting it down. Vasquez said something to the group that he didn't catch. Farr laughed, briefly, and then covered it with the practiced professionalism of someone who had been professional for 9 days and was going to be professional for 9 more minutes, and then was going to stop. Hassan leaned against the corridor wall and did not move away from it, and the person who had been monitoring his lean, Marcus, stood close without appearing to stand close, which was something. Orath thought that you either knew how to do or you didn't. He told them a medical assessment team was standing by in Wing 1. He told them quarters assignments had been cleared for rest rotation and that standard return-to-duty protocols would follow the medical clearance. He told them the directorate review team would arrive within 14 days and that all synthesis documentation should be preserved in primary storage. He said all of this correctly, in the correct order, in the tone of a station commander delivering procedural information to returning personnel. Vasquez was watching him while he said it, with the particular attention of someone listening for something below the procedural register. He did not know what she heard. She said, "Thank you, Commander." The way she said it made it a complete sentence rather than an acknowledgement. He accepted it. They moved toward Wing 1 and the medical team. Hassan pushed off the wall and walked with them, the lean visible, the monitoring invisible. Orath watched them go. His lower arms were moving. His patterning was at baseline or close enough to baseline that the difference was not meaningful. He went back to his terminal. The final incident report took 3 hours, He wrote it correctly. Every fact in the correct order. Every decision with its justification. Every deviation from protocol cross-referenced against the station operational code. Every biosensor reading. Every anomalous behavior field filled with accurate and specific language. He wrote about the materials transfer and its authorization and its outcome. He wrote about the synthesis documentation and its methodology and its results. He wrote about 17 personnel who had been sealed in a quarantine wing on day 0 with a novel pathogen and biosafety level 4 exposure status, and who were, on day 9, alive and in medical assessment and requesting return to duty clearance. He got to the conclusion field. He sat with it. The field was blank, the way a page is blank. Not empty, but waiting. He had written conclusions for 114 incident reports in his career, none of them longer than a paragraph, all of them tightly calibrated to the administrative purpose of the field, implications for future protocol, recommendations for directorate review, summary of lessons applicable to similar future incidents. He thought about 17 people in a sealed wing given a death sentence they had apparently treated as a research problem. He thought about Marcus Webb at Camera 7. Not once but twice, the first time to give a thumbs up, the second time to ask to come out, and both times thinking about the person watching on the other side. He thought about Tariq Hassan walking through the decon airlock under his own power, with a slight lean to the left and the particular relief of watching someone do a thing that 9 days ago the protocol had correctly assessed they would not be able to do. He thought about the Galactic Quarantine Protocol, which was not wrong. He was careful about this because it mattered. The protocol was built on correct assumptions about how living things behaved in impossible situations, and the assumptions were correct because they had been validated across 11 documented cases and the full weight of galactic biosafety history. The protocol was not wrong. The protocol had a gap in it, and he had watched the shape of the gap for 9 days through a camera feed, and the shape of it was exactly human. He thought about the word he had looked for when he transferred the chemicals. The second word for the specific state of a person who has done a thing that is both a violation and a necessity, who has broken the line in front of him because the line was in the wrong place, and is standing in the broken space waiting to find out what it costs. He had checked, twice, during the 9 days. The Seco language did not have this word. It had adjacent concepts. It had words for regret, and words for duty, and words for the kind of grief that comes from being right about something you wanted to be wrong about. It did not have the word for this. He began to write. He wrote the longest conclusion of his career. He wrote about what the protocol was built to do and what the directorate's documented outcomes across 112 developing civilizations suggested about whether it was doing it. He wrote about the gap between a framework designed to protect and the question of what protection required when the protected refused the protection's assumptions. He wrote about the synthesis documentation currently in primary storage, complete, rigorous, reproducible, developed in a sealed quarantine wing using equipment not designed for xenobiology by a team working under conditions the protocol classified as non-viable, and what that documentation represented as an evidentiary claim on what was and was not non-viable. He wrote a formal recommendation for directorate review of the non-interference provisions governing quarantine protocol for Class 3 and above civilizations, with specific reference to the question of whether the protocol's outcome modeling had been validated against observed human response data. He wrote this carefully and correctly, in the language of a professional incident report, because language of that kind, filed through official channels, was the only kind that moved institutions. He wrote, as the final line of the conclusion, the sentence from his private log that had not been private since the moment he wrote it. They did not do the impossible. They did something we had no category for. These are not the same thing. He submitted the report. The confirmation indicator lit. He closed the terminal. He sat at his desk for a moment in the station's familiar frequency hum, his lower arms in motion, his patterning at baseline, the monitoring station's camera feeds dark behind him. 19 years in this room, 114 reports. He thought about the shape of his career, the clean and careful line of it, every decision made correctly, every protocol executed by memory, 22 years of doing the right thing precisely right. He thought about what it felt like to be right and wrong simultaneously about the same set of facts, and whether this feeling had a name in any language he knew. He thought about coffee. Dr. Vasquez had offered it to him 7 times in 7 years. He had declined each time on the grounds that the Galactic Xenobiology database listed it as a chemical stimulant with significant species variable effects, and that his administrative judgment was that adding unknown stimulants to his chemistry while managing a research station was not regulation. This was correct. This had always been correct. He had been correct about it for 7 years. He got up from his desk. He walked out of the operations hub into the station corridor, which was quiet at this hour. The familiar geometry of Verath Central Hub is known to him as his own patterning. He walked toward Wing 1. His lower arms moved at their normal rate. His resonance plate was open, and the station's ambient sound came through it cleanly. The frequency that had kept him awake for 19 years hummed against his chest, and he walked through it, and the station looked, incrementally, like somewhere he had not been before. Not because it had changed, but because he had spent 9 days looking at it through camera feeds, at the remove of a monitoring station, bearing witness to something he could not control and could not look away from, and now he was walking through it with his own feet, and the difference was noticeable. He found Dr. Vasquez in the Wing 1 common room, still carrying her data tablet, standing near the counter where the coffee dispenser had been installed 3 years ago at the human's specific request. She looked up when he came in and raised an eyebrow, which was a human expression he had catalogued as questioning. He said, "I have been told the effects are species variable." She said, "They are." She said, "You'll probably be fine." She said, "The worst-case scenario is that you find everything slightly more interesting for a few hours." He stood in the doorway of the Wing 1 common room on Verath Station, 19 years in command, and considered the worst-case scenario. His lower arms were moving. His patterning was baseline warm. He said, "I'll risk it." He walked in,